We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Lako, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Hi, everyone. We are back this week with Elena Willits from Kind Organizing. I had the pleasure of going on your podcast, Elena, and I'm just so thrilled to have you on mine.
Oh, thank you. It was so fun having you on mine too. I love that we're doing this little podcast swap too. So fun.
I know. Oh, me too. And it really works out because I feel like we wanted to keep talking, which is a good sign when we recorded for yours. And so we were like, oh, good. Yes. We're going to be doing this again soon. Anyway.
Keep it going. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know who you are, would you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about what you do?
Absolutely. My name is Elena Willits. I am a mom of two, soon to be three. And I started this business, Kind Organizing, a little over a year ago, although my personal decluttering journey started about 5 years ago when my oldest daughter turned 2. But I started this business really with the idea that I want to take the shame out of our home organizing process and help women, specifically moms really, to balance the day-to-day life in their home, but without feeling like it's stressful or adding more overwhelm, because none of us need that. And I'm coming from the background of someone who was not historically very organized in my home. And so I know the uphill battle that it is for some of us. So that's just my goal, to help as many moms as I can kind of get underwater from that feeling and feel like they can manage their homes and feel happy in the process.
It's so important that women in particular hear that specific message, because even this morning I put up a little poll on my Instagram stories that's like, where do you feel this pressure when it comes to the tidiness of your home and decluttering? And I said, and I gave the options, it's like an internal thing, maybe based on comparison or shame, or the other options where they saw maybe some kind of unempathetic questions or comments online, or maybe someone said something to them in person. And as of before coming on the podcast, I think something like 78% of the answers were that this was an internal pressure that we put on ourselves that comes from a place of comparison. And so we have to hear the blatant, clear messaging from someone like you saying, you do not have to be ashamed, because even if someone's not telling us the opposite, no one's saying you should be ashamed of your house. Most of us aren't hearing that, but we're saying it to ourselves. So we really need the other kind of messaging to counteract that inner voice that can be so mean to ourselves. So I just love your approach. And when so you said you started decluttering, maybe sharing publicly a couple years ago, but did your decluttering process also start then, or was it before you started sharing?
Yeah, it was before I started sharing. And I love what you said. And that doesn't surprise me on the poll. And yet it's so sad, right? Like our internal self-talk is so harsh, and it's not coming from outside of us. And I certainly relate to that pressure. But really, it started years and years ago when I first got married, because I was always very organized at work. So I had no issues, in that realm. But then I started noticing at home, I would do this thing, there wasn't a term for it then, but now it's called doom piles. Didn't organize, only moved. But there were piles all over the house, and like keeping up with the dishes, the laundry, it all felt very overwhelming. And we just had stuff, like a lot of stuff accumulated. So that was the inkling, the beginning of the thinking of something has to change. But it was really only when I had my first baby that I started to realize, around pretty quickly, but around when she was a toddler, that we have too much stuff, and the lack of a home maintenance day-to-day, some kind of system, is really hurting the culture of our family. It just feels like it's chaotic. There's stuff everywhere. And yet I couldn't find a solution that felt calming to my brain, which I know we'll dive into this, but I've since found out I have ADHD. But a lot of the systems were so prescriptive, like just get up and clean your house, or there was this sort of implication that you're being lazy if you can't keep up with it. So not only could I not keep up with the housework, but I felt this internalized shame around it. Like if there was only some way I was better, and I wasn't even conscious of this thought, but it was just in the background. If I was better somehow or good enough, I could succeed. And I always felt so proud of myself at work. I always had the gold stars at work. But when I became a stay-at-home mom, it was like, not only was there not an external boss giving me gold stars, but like our toddlers are not giving us gold stars, right? It's the opposite. They're just in general, like, give me more or do more. And then my house was falling apart. And so it was from that journey that I went, okay, I am walking around with so much shame day after day, and I can't live like this anymore. So yes, I started working on systems and I decluttered and I got rid of things in my home and it became easier. But the deeper work I started to do was to really validate my worth apart from how my home looked. Because I think we can learn these amazing tactics and tools and they're essential. But if we are still berating ourselves all the time in our mind, it's only a Band-Aid on the deeper issue. So that's kind of been my journey. And from there, I started helping friends and some family members and neighbors with like their clutter issues, especially lots of sentimental clutter or like backlogs, decades of stuff. And I decided, gosh, I love this. So I started kind of organizing the business, about just over a year ago now, and I loved it. But then I entered a season where, as you know, as a mom, there's a lack of childcare sometimes, and that's where I'm at. And so I realized, I'm going to just embrace the season I'm in. I'm going to be with my toddler. I'm going to be pregnant. I'm going to be with my first grader and just help people remotely and virtually as possible. And I trust that in the future, I'll have more bandwidth to do in person because I love it so much. But for now, I'm just trying to help people via Instagram, Voxer, and then online courses and the podcast. And just letting that be what it is.
Lots of resources.
There's some resources.
It's first of all, thank you for offering those resources because they are very needed. Like it is not an uncommon problem for women to be overwhelmed by their homes. I think that's why we're seeing such an uptick of this kind of content showing up on the internet because people are finally talking about it, And what I appreciate as well about what you said is that oftentimes we hear these prescriptive solutions and it can feel a little bit condescending, like, well, yeah, I know I should just pick up the stuff in the pile and put it where it belongs.
Right.
Like, duh.
It's easy.
It's not that simple, right? It's similar to telling someone who struggles with overeating. I say this to my husband too, because I've been struggling with that, especially recently. And like postpartum, I'll just eat when I'm emotional. I'm like, I know what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. But it's a completely different story when you're telling someone, well, just don't eat as much. Well, that's hard.
That's right.
It's just not the way my brain is working currently. And it's similar to, decluttering. So I love that you really get into these deeper reasons behind to find those tactics and tools, because it is possible. We can push through and quote, just do it. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be doing it in a prescriptive way that works for other people. It might look different for us, which we'll get into a little bit with the ADHD thing here in just a second. But so that people can hear your transition, what about your life has changed the most when you started living with just less to manage?
Oh, the best. Well, I know you can relate, but I almost can't think of an area that hasn't changed since having less stuff. I feel like, and I could even declutter more, but I feel like letting go of things that I was no longer actively using, has freed up not just physical space in my home, but mental space in my brain to actually be creative and to utilize the things I have and enjoy what I have. I used to have so much stuff that it just felt like I'd walk into a room and just instantly feel overwhelmed. Even if I couldn't see it, It was just, behind closed doors or in drawers. I knew it was there. And I started noticing, especially for our older daughter, how much it was affecting her to have just tons of like toys and visual chaos all around. So even the process, which has been challenging with her because she likes to hang on to everything, of slowly but surely letting some things go and kind of whittling down all the things, she seems calmer. My toddler actually plays with her toys because she knows what's there, right? It isn't just like a room full of craziness. And I think there's something to be said for that visual calm in our environment, creating mental calm in our being. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of decluttering. Huge fan.
That's awesome. And by the way, I just said like we'll talk about the ADHD thing, and I was like, oh gosh, that sounded so dismissive, like just
Oh
that
no, it did
ADHD
not.
thing. So I apologize if it came out that way. I had to say that. I was like, gosh, that sounded ridiculous.
It
But
didn't. It didn't.
thank you. Okay, so what does your home look like now on a daily basis? I want to give that visual to people so they understand that you're still like a real human and you're not walking around in like a perfect home. But
Nope.
obviously, it's a lot different than it was when you had a bunch of stuff. So, what does your house look like on a daily basis?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll share with you what a week looks like when I'm actually following the systems that I've learned, and then what happens when it goes off the rails, because that happens too. So right now I'm in a good rhythm. My husband was out of town for a couple of days, and that actually gave me some time to kind of reset. That was my goal, to like reset the home. So I went room by room and just kind of got to a base level of it feeling calm. So right now, in this moment, I did my little 10-minute reset when I put my toddler down for her nap. So the kitchen looks pretty good. Dishes are done. Surfaces are clear because that's huge for me. I don't like having a lot of stuff on the counters because it makes me feel instantly pretty overwhelmed. Um, the main kind of areas we use, the bedrooms are pretty good. There's some piles of laundry here and there, but it doesn't feel crazy. That's what I enjoy when I'm following a rhythm of sort of, my daily tidying routine and my daily cleaning routine. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it feels like my nervous system can calm down at the end of the day. And I actually enjoy being in my home. Okay, so the other example, which I was living in 2 weeks ago, is the off the rails, where I had let the dishes go for a couple days. It was a busy time. It happens, but it just felt like chaos. There was laundry piled up. There was, dishes, there was stuff everywhere. And I really felt it. And I could tell my husband and our kids felt it too. That kind of chaotic energy. Like, why am I so stressed? And it's because there was so much stuff around. So now when I do, because this happens, I'm a human being, also the ADHD, when things pile up and I do one of these massive resets, it isn't from a place of punishment anymore. It used to feel like, oh, this is the worst. Now I'm like, but remember how good you feel on the other side of this. So, I put on my podcast or my audiobook or whatever, and I get through it, and then it's manageable again. And I really like to live in that space where possible, day to day, because I just enjoy our home more. It's self-care to me. It used to be true punishment. Now it feels like, okay, when I can keep up with this stuff, I actually enjoy coming downstairs in the morning. It isn't like instant stress at 6:30 in the morning, like where you're already feeling behind and nothing's even happened.
I love that you touched on this key component of transitioning from a tougher week or a messier week into your rhythms that work better for you. And the key here is that once we live with less, it doesn't mean that we don't have messes anymore or that things don't pile up. Like that's
Right.
just part of living, right? But the key is that you were able to do this reset. It didn't take you weeks and weeks, months and months, or years or anything, right? It took you a day, probably, like you said, when your
Right.
husband was out of town. You go through, you can reset really easily. And that speaks to that quote that all of us love in this decluttering world, which is we're not looking for a home that is always tidy. We're looking for a home that's easy to tidy. And
Yes.
I think that's so important for people to hear. And I love that you displayed that so honestly and realistically, which is does not mean your house is always perfect or that you don't fall off the
No.
bandwagon. It just means it's easier to get back on track.
Yes. That's so well said. 100%.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to dive into this particular challenge when it comes to decluttering, which is your experience with ADHD. I actually have gotten a fair amount of requests or questions in my DMs saying, yeah, but I can't, it's harder. I can't really do it because I have ADHD, or my partner has ADHD.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so it makes it really hard. So I am so excited to pick your brain today to learn more about this struggle, to get those practical tips for people, both for themselves and helping a partner along, and really kind of take away any of this shame or judginess that maybe people with ADHD feel towards themselves, or
Yeah.
people who don't have ADHD might feel the sense of frustration or misunderstanding. And today, the goal is to wipe all of that away,
Yeah.
and figure out how to view this in a more positive light, because there are very beautiful positive parts about ADHD. It's something that makes you unique, and it's not all bad. And I am excited to kind of dive into that. But the first thing I would love is if you could give us just an overview of what ADHD is.
Yeah. And I can only, of course, speak from my experience because I'm not a therapist or doctor or anything, but based on my research and what the experience has been for me, ADHD is, first of all, it shows up differently in women than men in general. And there hasn't been a lot of research up until, from my understanding, the last couple decades on women and girls and ADHD. So that's why many of us were not diagnosed as kids, because there was this sort of preconceived notion that ADHD looked like how it presented in a lot of hyperactive boys. And it doesn't even always present as hyperactive. So, for many of us, because there are three different types of ADHD, there's a combined type of these two, but there's hyperactive and inattentive. And, there's other people who are experts who can dive on in this. And I can share a couple of podcasts that I've really loved and learned a lot from with ADHD. But for an inattentive type, which is how I am, everything that's hyperactive is actually internal. So as a kid, I was never a fidgety kid. I was very focused in class. I can listen really well and focus in, especially if I'm interested in the subject matter. But my mind was then and is now always going 100 miles an hour. And it's racing. And there's tons of ideas. And I have no shortage of, like, when we're talking about business ideas, I have a million ideas that I get excited about. And then I jump in and I hyper focus, and I can do that for hours on end and have tons of energy. But then I burn out because it's just been, this like racehorse energy. And then on the other side of things, um, people tend to think with ADHD, it's like a lack of focus. It is not a lack of focus or attention. It's a lack of focus or attention on things that do not interest you. So if you said to me, hey, we're going to talk about decluttering all day today, or like parenting, or like a subject that I feel really into, I can deep dive forever. But if you said, Elena, how about we go in this room and like you can work on these Excel spreadsheets for an hour, my energy would just plummet because it's not an area of interest for me. So that is something that took me decades to learn, because I never thought I had ADHD. I was like, no, I'm really good at focusing and applying myself. But then when I had the assessment, one of the main questions she asked was, okay, but in school, like when you loved, reading and English was always great. AP Comp was great, but what about science? How was that for you? And I'm like, oh, it was the worst. I remember it taking hours to finish an assignment, whereas I could write a paper in 45 minutes. So I think that's something a lot of people don't understand. And it's something I'm now learning more about. It isn't that you're really spacey or distracted or flaky and you can't focus on anything. It's that the things that don't light your brain up and give all that dopamine are extremely hard in many situations to zero in on. And then the things you're passionate about, you could do all day long. Well, how does housework and organizing fit into this? For many of us, cleaning falls into that first group of, oh, wow, this is the worst. And so for many of us with ADHD, we would avoid it. And then it becomes unbelievably overwhelming because your whole house is just full of stuff. You don't even want to walk into a room. it's beyond. So, we can dive into that a little bit further, but just to give an overview of like at least my experience of ADHD and what I understand about it, it's nothing like I used to think. And if I had known all of this a decade ago, I would have loved it, because I think I would have had a lot more compassion and understanding for myself and other people who live with this day to day, because there's some gifts for sure. And also, it is not easy in many areas.
Yeah. You make a really interesting point that it nobody loves to listen to or work on things they don't love, right? Like that is a normal human experience.
Totally.
But I think that a lot of times perhaps someone like me, I don't struggle with ADHD, doesn't or hasn't in the past maybe recognized the extreme difference between I don't like this, but I can like buckle up and do it, right?
Yeah.
Versus someone with ADHD, that's just not even like possible with the way that your brain works. You can tell yourself, "Oh, I should buckle up and do this," but you can't sort out all of the little things that need to be sorted just to start or
Yes.
just to focus, right? And it's not the same thing as fortitude. Like I don't have more fortitude than you do. I don't have more will or discipline. That's not it. It
Yes.
is truly a difference in how our brains work and process information. And I think that is just a really important thing to distinguish, because all of us might nod along and say, well, yeah, duh. If you don't like science, it's harder to do science class. But that's not the
Yeah.
level we're talking about here.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's, there's, I think, a little bit of backlash here and there saying, well, everybody seems to have ADHD now. And that's because, first of all, it was underdiagnosed for so many decades that a lot of us as women are only finding out when we start to seek out diagnoses or learn more for our kids. I mean, that was my journey. And I just still don't know for sure if our first grader has ADHD, but it took me down enough research rabbit holes to go, whoa, this all sounds familiar. And then I listened to a podcast by a woman named Jenna Kutcher, who you might be familiar with, but she interviewed an expert in ADHD, and that completely changed my entire perception of it. And Jenna Kutcher herself has ADHD. But to your point, it is not the same as saying, I really don't want to do this, so I'm not interested in it. That is a common human experience. With ADHD, it really is extremely difficult to get motivated to do something. And it's not for lack of trying. And it's not a willpower thing, like you said. It's not like a determination. And that was something I so fiercely judged myself on for years. And I've seen so many women do the same, where like, why can't I get it together? Why can't I complete this? And it's like, it's not it's not because you're lazy. It's not for lack of trying. It is simply the way your brain is wired. So you have to work with your brain, not against your brain.
Yeah, and historically, obviously, women, the expectation is for us to be able to naturally just handle household duties. Like that is like,
Right.
it's very socialized that this should just be something women are good at, is organization and tidying and keeping the home. And it's interesting to hear your perspective as a woman struggling with ADHD. And of course, that does not at all what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't lessen the experience of a man with ADHD,
Not
but
at
the point
all.
is that these things do show up differently, and I'm so glad that you're speaking to your experience with that. So before you found some tools that helped you declutter your home, and I'm going to get into all those, but your home had all these different piles and it all just was a lot. How did your ADHD show up in terms of shame? Did you have shame revolving around your ADHD and around your home? What did that look like?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And in large part because of that messaging that you said, that as women, I think we're often expected to just do this and do it well. And I had always prized myself on, if I work hard at something, I can get it done. And that was my experience in the world professionally and even in school, that if I apply myself, I'll do really well. I really loved the gold stars. I loved getting great feedback from my boss, or when I was in school, getting good grades. And so when I was at home as a stay-at-home mom, it was such a drastic identity shift when, like I said earlier, I couldn't get good at home care. I could, and it wasn't for lack of trying. I was just like, what am I missing here? And in part, it's because I hadn't learned the skills as a kid. So that's why I also feel very passionate about teaching my kids basic home skills, but like making it fun, and it doesn't have to be drudgery. I feel really strongly about that we can have our kids kind of take part in this and they get excited and they take pride in their spaces and they can learn to cook and bake. It doesn't have to be like this huge thing.
Just
This
want to
skill.
interject right there because I
Yeah.
have to say this. Please do not use cleaning and tidying as a punishment or
Thank you.
consequence. Oh my gosh, because
Oh,
then they're never going to want to do it when they
they're
get
never going to
older.
want to do. Oh my gosh, so true. And like, how often was that the case? Probably, unintentionally, but in our upbringings or like historically, that was the thing, like your punishment is you're going to go out and shovel snow or whatever it was. 100%. I really try to make it, we call it like our family daily five. Where at least for my older daughter, she does more than the toddler, but the toddler helps. And she gets in there and it's like, we're doing the dishes together and we're prepping dinner and it's communal and it's fun. And it's like even decluttering, we've kind of branded it in our family a little different way. It's like a fun activity. Like you get to choose the music because she loves to be in control of everything. And like you get to say how long we're going to do this. And it makes it like their buy-in and their excitement is so much greater because it's like a family thing we do together. And I'm so with you on not making it a punishment. Oh my gosh. Yes, never again.
And I'm sorry I interrupted. I was just thinking
No.
as you were talking, I was like, oh, this is such a good point. But you were talking about how you didn't have that experience growing up
Yeah,
necessarily learning the tools.
that's right. So that's a part of it. But then, because I've always prided myself on being a quick learner and I can pick up things and I'm a smart person. So I'm like, okay, I'm an intelligent woman. I know what to do. Why can I still not figure this out? And so, yes, the shame took root early and it took root pretty deep. And I didn't even realize, I don't think, how deep. But that I just could not seem to keep up with our house. And this was not an externalized thing like your poll. It wasn't like my husband was, being rude about it or whatever. It was my own voice always going, get it together, get it together. And then when I had my first daughter, it was like, kids really do need you to keep up and on top of this stuff. They're going through tons of clothes. There's food and all kinds of stuff everywhere all the time. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me because that's when I launched into it. But I had to face the years of shame underneath it because that was my big obstacle. And I dare to say that's the obstacle for many of us. Not that we can't learn tools, but that we are so unbelievably hard on ourselves that we should know the tools when for whether you have ADHD or not, keeping your house together is not always easy. It's not like something that many of us were taught. And even like what no one ever says is even people who have these great systems, like you said earlier, the house still falls apart sometimes. It's just easier to get back on the horse and get it going again. But we don't share on Instagram typically like, look at this playroom when it's crazy. It's like before and a quick after. It's not like we shared the 3 weeks that it sometimes looks like that.
Exactly. People think, oh, she cleans the playroom every day. I'm like,
That's right.
no, this before picture was around for a little while.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
okay, so how did you finally get started when it's so hard for you to start?
Okay, so I did not know at the time I had ADHD, but now that I do know, this makes so much sense. I found a way to make it fun. That was my gateway in to getting it done. And because I love an audiobook and I'd listened to a lot of decluttering audiobooks and there are some great ones out there. So that got me on the journey of like listening and having an audio paired with doing the activity really started to make it fun. But when it really took off for me was when I started focusing on decluttering as a set of projects because my brain loves a project. There's like a creative spark that happens. There's a start and an end, which as we know, house home care and decluttering, it is never ending, but I didn't know that at the time. I just thought if I get this done, we're going to be good. So that was my gateway in, where I just said, okay, today I'm going to work on our kitchen. Today I'm going to work on the pantry in the kitchen. Today I'm going to work on my room. And I would listen to an audio, either a podcast. At the time I was listening to the Happier podcast by Gretchen Rubin, which was great because there were so many episodes, and I was like one after another. And pretty soon, because I had a little one who was still napping, and it was, I had one child at the time. So they almost made it easier. Not that caring for one child is easier than 2 or 3. I want to name that. But in this season, it was great because it was one kid napping and I could just do it all during one nap. I started feeling progress, and that gave me momentum. I'm like, whoa, okay. I got through this closet. I'm done. I got through the pantry. It's looking good. We can actually find the ketchup. Like, I started to feel like I could breathe again. And that gave me the momentum to keep going into the second part of my decluttering journey, which is realizing it's ongoing. It isn't just a project where it's one and done. And that was kind of a rude awakening a little bit for me. But at least that momentum kept me going through that second phase.
Yes. So what I'm hearing reminds me a lot of a book I am sure you have read because it sounds like it's right up your alley, which is by Casey Davis. And
Yes.
what is the name of that book?
It's How to Keep House While Drowning.
That's it. That's the
Love
one.
her. Yes.
So good. So good.
So good.
And there's a section of the book where she does talk about making it more fun, especially if you struggle with any sort of mental health. What's the word? Because it's not, I don't want to say disorder. I'm tired of that. That is such a negative connotation. But let's say you struggle with ADHD or even depression or something going on.
Yes.
She talks about that, turning on music, turning on a podcast or an audiobook, and all of us might benefit from that, right? I mean, I love listening to audiobooks or whatever, but there's something about when you have ADHD, from what she shared and what I'm hearing from you, that it takes that focus off of necessarily what's in front of you that's overwhelming you.
Yes.
And that what you're working on with your hands almost becomes background noise to what you're listening to, which is what you really enjoy.
Yes.
And I think that's a really powerful tool. And sometimes we just keep trying to do the same thing. Like, tonight, I'm just going to fold the laundry, instead of being like, wait, I need to switch this up. Where am I folding my laundry? What am I listening to? What's going on while I'm folding? Why is this not a fun task? And I think sounds like you did that really well. You were like, I can't keep trying the same way I've been doing it in the past. So you needed to reorganize it and offer a new experience for yourself while you were doing these things.
Yeah. And I wish her book had been around then. I would have loved that. I mean, I love Casey Davis. I've listened to that book once and I need to go back and listen again. But I wish I'd known that then, because I think, and I'm so glad she's doing the work she's doing in the world, because it's so powerful for everyone, whether you're neurodivergent or not. It's, if you're going through a season of depression or anxiety, or you're just living day to day, I think that having these tools is essential, and it's not something we're taught in school. Typically, many of us didn't learn growing up from our parents because they never learned it. It's not common knowledge. And so I'm just glad that, whatever divine intervention happened where I had this awareness of what would actually help move the needle and work for my brain took root, because not only could I start doing it, but I kind of fell in love with it. I was like, what can I declutter now? Like, what can I let go of? What 5 bags can I fill up to get out of our home? Like you talked about on our last podcast chat, that kind of dopamine hit you get from letting things go is like, it's so strong, and it feels so liberating and fun to just be like, what can I let go of today? And so, yeah, I think falling in love with the process has made it not only fun, but I miss it now when I'm not doing it. At least the decluttering, cleaning the house, let's be real. I don't know that I'm ever going to fall in love with that. I can tolerate it, but decluttering,
some people love that
like
part
fun.
of it.
Right.
I'm
don't
like, no,
they?
I don't want to. I don't love that part of it. I don't like scrubbing my shower. I don't love any of that. I want to just get things out of my house. That's what I like.
That's right. That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, that's yes, that's so good. And so, while we're on the subject of kind of how this auditory level really helped bring an element of newness and fun and enjoyment to you, what are some other practical tips that you have found worked for you specifically because of your ADHD? Like let's offer the people some practicality here.
Yeah, totally about the practical. And that's also what I love about what you share, because it's great to talk all day long about ideas and theories, but if it's not like a practical tip, nothing really changes. So, yes, okay, anything that gamifies the whole process and makes it fun, that's always going to be a winner, at least for the ADHD brain, but I think most of our brains. And the biggest thing I do, I call it my, decluttering or tidying toolkit, is I always start with a timer. So, a lot of us are familiar with the Pomodoro method and all of that. But for me, I like to have a visual timer, and it's pink, so it's cute. So that that helps my dopamine too. But I set it for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 20, whatever I have that day. And I go in sprints. So what I mean by that is let's say I'm decluttering. I'll set it for 20 minutes, and I will put in my AirPods, put on my audio, and just go. And I will do as much as I can, as quickly as I can, for 15 to 20 minutes. Then I'll stop, take a break, have a little water. If I have time, jump back in for another sprint. And if we're talking like, it's a Saturday and it's during nap time, I happen to have an hour, that's amazing. But even if it's just 15 to 20 minutes, it is shocking how much you can get done when you're moving quickly and like timing yourself.
It's
Isn't it?
crazy.
It's
Yes.
crazy. It's like, I thought this was going to take 7 hours, and it's literally 20 minutes. And I think that helps too, because we start realizing the things that we resist doing really don't take as long as we think they will. Especially the stuff we really don't want to do, like scrubbing the shower, or, for me, the dishes. Sometimes with the dishes, I just can't. I look at it and I'm like, you again? Like, really? I just did this an hour ago. But when I time myself and I realize it takes 4 minutes and 30 seconds to like empty the dishwasher, then I get momentum to keep going. And I will gamify as much as possible. And our kids get involved too. They they do their best. I try to let them help without any stress, because the glasses are going to go wherever they're going to go and whatever. But we'll put on a song and be like, how much can we get done in this 3 minutes? And it's as fun for them as it is for me, because it's like, when you have an element of fun in it, you're now pairing fun in your brain with a chore, in quotes, that might have felt like drudgery in the past. And I believe it starts to rewire our brains so that when we see that next time, it's not so daunting. It's like, okay, dishes, you're not going to take that long. And if you can like kind of see how many cups you can hold in one hand at a time, or like whatever makes it fun for you, just to get through it, I think that cannot be understated. So that's what I'd say. Gamify the timer, because it tells your brain this won't go on forever. I think when we start something that we don't want to do and we think, well, this is never going to end, there's a like a defeat we already feel. But it's like when you're in a workout class and they're like, okay, 5 more reps. You're like, I can do 5 more reps, like this isn't gonna, I'm not gonna have to do this for the next 2 hours. So when you see on your timer, oh my gosh, I only have 7 more minutes of this, it gives a sense of urgency, and you get going quickly, and your brain knows I'm not doing this forever. And I believe that's very calming at the end of the day.
Oh my gosh, yes. And those visual timers are so cool. We got one in green just a couple of months ago to help both my husband and my son, and they love it. It's so cool because you can see how
Yes.
like it's looks like a slice of pie, right? And it gets smaller and smaller. The slice of pie gets smaller, and it's just so much easier for certain brains to have that visual cue too. It's not
Yes.
um it's very visual, and I love that. And I love that you're talking about gamifying too, because that's something that, like you said, you turn on a 3 minute timer and see how much you can do. So we've taken that approach with helping my oldest, he's in kindergarten, so just a little younger than yours, clean the playroom. He gets really overwhelmed, which I get, even when the mess
Yeah.
isn't huge. So his thing is, he, for whatever reason, has chosen the song Africa by Toto.
Love
God bless
it.
the rains down in Africa,
Yes.
And so that's the song he always turns on. And we're like, okay, by the time this song is over, let's see if we can get this whole playroom clean, right?
Oh,
Because our
so
playroom is
sweet.
decluttered, generally speaking, unless I've let it go a little too long, we can usually get it done in one song, right? And then
Wow.
another one is from the books. Gosh, they are outdated. They are like from the 1950s. I think it's Miss Pigglewiggle. Does that ring a bell to you? They're
Oh,
children's
kind
books.
of.
So we got them for like free on an audiobook or whatever. And so we started listening to them. And there are some lessons in there that I'm like, oh, these are like not PC.
Right.
But there was one great story about how this kid didn't want to clean their room or whatever, and so they started to pretend, Miss Pigwell pretended that she was a witch or someone was going to come get you and put you in the dungeon, and you make a game out of it, like an imaginary fun game for the kids. And so I didn't even have to
Mm,
try that hard. Like, honestly, I hate playing pretend, but it
yeah.
was enough that I put the kids in the playroom and I'm like, I'm a witch, I'm gonna come get you and put you in the dungeon unless you put the toys here or whatever. And then they go, they scream and they start putting the toys away. And then I'll peek around the corner and be like, I see you, just like something silly. And
Yeah.
that's for kids. But like, we can take that concept into adulthood and be like, we do, like, you can gamify anything and make it
Anything.
so much more fun. So
Yes,
much more fun.
yes. Sometimes we forget that as adults and we try to be so like mature and like analytical, but like sometimes you have to remember like there's a kid still living within you. So why not appeal to that kid and that kid brain? There's no shame in that we all need fun and like silliness.
Oh
It's
my
important.
gosh. 1,000%. You know what has really brought out the inner kid in me is that my daughter got a Barbie dream house for Christmas this year. And
Oh,
we just sit in there and sometimes she said, Mommy, I don't want you to organize my Barbie dream house. I want you to play. I'm like, okay, called out, because I was sitting there and I'm like, oh, I could put her dresses
right.
on the hangers and like make the whole scene look good. And she just wants to play pretend and be like, Barbie wants to go swimming with the turtle and blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, we're playing a little differently, but it really has, ignited that sense of a play. And that's how we clean her room. She only gets to keep her
Mm,
Barbie dream house and some stuffies in her room. There's the only toys in there. And so when
yes.
we go in there to clean, it is more like play. We're just kind of playing by putting things back into the Barbie dream house.
I
so
love that. Oh, that's so great. That's so
so how does
great.
your ADHD show up for you now when it comes to consumption? So that's another piece of this,
Mm,
is like, you might get excited about a new project or excited about a new idea or excited about this cool Instagram ad. And I know with ADHD, it's harder to say no because your brain gets really excited. How
yes.
do you combat that? What has helped?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Yeah, that is tough. And that is something I've had to actively work on because, yes, there is that dopamine hit from buying something, adding it to cart, buying it, and then all of a sudden it's not as exciting, even after ordering. So I've worked on this and had to be honest with myself a few different ways. One thing that really helped is I did something called a purchase pause a few months back where I didn't buy anything for a month. And I learned about it from my friend Ashley, who has the account, The Tailored Life. And she's an organizer and she's so wonderful. But it was, I think, originated by Shira Gill, who wrote Minimalista, and Ashley Piper. But they started this whole kind of, there's many different words for it and phrases, but the purchase pause, or the no new things challenge, that's what it is. And it changed the entire way I approached buying because I realized how often it was emotional, or it was, I was tired or I'd had a rough day, and I'd find myself on the Sephora website and it's like, oh, there's a lip gloss, add to cart. And it's like, wait a minute. Whoa, do I even need this? Do I even want this? And so what I do, at least for my brain, it helped that month and it has helped since. In the notes app on my phone, I write down everything that I wanted to buy in that moment. And I give myself usually a few days or a week, and I circle back and go, do I really still want this? And of course, there's the fear of, but it's on sale right now. Oh no, I got to act fast. And of course, marketers play on that. That's their job. But I've had to tell myself and reassure myself there will be another sale. This does not need to be instant. I'm going to let it go. And the biggest thing I've had to do that with is online courses. Actually, I love an online course. I created an online course. I see the value in them. But sometimes I'm tempted to get something because I'm so excited about the solution it promises. And I'm not realizing, okay, but also this is going to take hours of your life. Like, is it the right time to purchase an online course and invest in it. And I put it on the notes app and I wait and I give it time. And that tends to allow my brain to kind of relax, because even though that's not consuming a physical item, it's consuming something that will take up mental bandwidth, which I also really value because I know how crazy mental clutter can be. So yeah, I think that overconsumption thing and that impulse buying with ADHD, I think it's hard for all of us, frankly, but it is a real challenge. And I just have had to remind myself that it feels so good to have less, to have what I truly need and want and nothing more. And do I really want this pair of shoes? And I try to follow one in, one out. What shoes will I get rid of? And if I can't answer that, I'm like, nope, we're not going to do this right now. So, but yeah, it is hard. I'm not going to say it's not, but it's a work in progress, let's say.
Yeah, and it's so great that you write those things that you want down. I actually do a screenshot, so it's similar. I'll screenshot it and put it in a photo album. Same concept, because
Smart.
there's this fear I'm going to forget about it.
Yeah.
Even though then there's the logical side of that that's like, well, if you forget about it, then you don't really
Does
need
you
it.
really
But
want
there's
it?
the
Yeah.
other side that's like, but what if I want something like that and I forget about this one that I really, really like or whatever? And so by writing it down, taking a picture, whatever, it tells our brains, hey, don't freak out. We won't forget about this. And then it allows us to come
Yeah.
back and see it without that kind of excitement that we feel at the beginning. Um,
Totally.
okay, my last question before we dive into the two ones that I love to ask everyone at the end of the podcast.
Yay.
But lastly, I would really love if you'd share what are some helpful ways we can encourage our partner or work with them in terms of managing the home if they have ADHD? Like,
Oh,
what
I
kind of
love it.
communication works and what kind of things should we avoid?
Oh my gosh, I love that you asked this question, and that's such a thoughtful question to ask, because I don't think a lot of people really think from that perspective because they maybe haven't needed to, or if you don't live in a neurodivergent brain, it's very hard from the outside not to think, well, why don't you just work harder on this? Like if you would apply yourself more, you're a smart person, you could do it. And I think when you have ADHD, it is very challenging for our partners. It really is. If you have like my husband does not have ADHD, and I give him so much credit because he's very willing to learn and wants to. And also because it's so highly hereditary, one of our children might end up having ADHD. So it's really good to know more about it. But he'll kind of say, like, how does your brain work? Like when you see this stack of things to do, walk me through that, because we've worked together for years. We collaborate, we have creative ideas, so he knows when I when I'm fired up with something to a fault. Sometimes I will hyper focus for a long time, so he's like, help me understand how that doesn't always apply to this area, but it does to this one. So I'd say the first tip I would offer is curiosity. Even though it's really hard, and I feel for you out there, partners who don't have ADHD and your spouse does, or your kids do and you don't. It's a lot. But if you can lead with the most generous interpretation and kind of go, they're not trying to not do this. They want to do more. They want to remember to, do the laundry and all the things. But there's some kind of barrier. So if you can sit down with them and say, can you kind of like help me understand how your brain works? Or is there a resource like a podcast that's helped you? I think that can be really valuable. And just that openness goes a long way, because when we have ADHD, we are so self-judgmental. And that's one thing I would tell anyone, is that as judgmental as you might be outside who do not have ADHD, please trust that we are 1,000 times harsher usually with our self-talk. Like we, on any given day, I mean, I can even think right now, there's 5 things I wish I was doing better. And with our house and life. And I think that that's something people don't always realize, is we tend to carry a lot of shame if we're running late for things, which is a hallmark typically of most ADHDers. We tend to be hard on ourselves when we can't do things that other people seem to be able to do very easily. And yes, there are many things we excel at. And one is, for many, being an entrepreneur. That's a big thing, ADHDers tend to be really good at. And ADHD kids are highly creative. Like there's a ton of great things, but we are very hard on ourselves, very, with the things that we don't excel at. So I think knowing that as a partner might help too. And I would just say getting on the same page, having a family meeting, taking the judgment out of it, and just sitting there and going, what 5 things can we kind of work on as a family? Because I do want to say it's a non-negotiable to have your house run well. It isn't like, just because you have ADHD, it things can slide for a while, but you need to have a home that feels good to you because it's important to your family unit. I really believe that. And for our own self-care. I mean, do your laundry from that place because you deserve to have clean clothes, not from the place of you're a bad person for, letting it pile up. You deserve to have dishes and a system that works for you. And maybe you and your partner can work together to find a system that will work for your brain. So you're in it together. It isn't me versus you. It's you and me against this problem together.
What's interesting too is that everything I'm hearing from you, it speaks to the point that we're not just labeling someone with ADHD or identifying it or diagnosing it for the sake of a label. We're doing it so we can help figure out how to help themselves or help someone else move through the world a little bit more easily, right? Like that's the
Yes.
whole point of understanding this. And on that note, you kind of started to say it, but the very last thing I actually do want to ask is what are some of the benefits of having ADHD? Let's change this conversation from there are
Yeah.
hard things and we need to recognize that, but I also know that there are really wonderful parts about someone with ADHD. And can you speak to what your favorite thing is about having
Yes.
this?
And in light of that, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, but just to bring up that podcast episode with Jenna Kutcher and Tracy Otsuka again, and I can't remember the name of the episode, but there's 2 of them. And if you have ADHD or suspect you might, or know someone who does, those are so empowering to listen to. That's what I listened to, the first one right before I had my assessment. And I cried listening because I was like, how validating this is. Because we're acutely aware of the shortcomings, right? Like, we're very aware. But to hear just these really beautiful, like, qualities shared. And I know Mel Robbins has had some great podcasts too on ADHD because she has ADHD. So, that I would say that first and foremost, research other women or other men who have ADHD, and you will be surprised and empowered to know how many successful, brilliant, amazing, funny, creative, great people out there are dealing with this day to day. It's a brain difference. It's not something that has to hold you back, I believe. But some of the great things about it are, from what I've heard and just my own experience, again, not a therapist or an expert, but in terms of like tons of ideas, creativity, the entrepreneurial spirit, there's some kind of statistic that like if you have ADHD, you're 300% more likely to be an entrepreneur, like something astronomically super high, because it lends itself to that, because we aren't super afraid to take risks. I mean, calculated risks. We typically can kind of just say how we feel and put it out there, and this is true for many people, but if, we have an idea, we'll just kind of jump into it and see how it goes. And there isn't always that constant like refining process and second guessing and perfectionism, although I do struggle with that. So I shouldn't say that's completely out there, but at least there's that creative vision and the confidence to jump in some way, shape, or form. There's a real degree of empathy and emotional depth. And, like I said, I don't know if my older daughter has ADHD or not. We haven't had her assessed, but I suspect she might. But when I watch her in the world and the way she feels so deeply and connects, and that's been true of every person I've met who has ADHD. Again, also true for people that don't. It's not like only ADHD folks are empathetic, but it's just important to know that there's this really beautiful quality of sensitivity, having a big heart, entering into a room and kind of intuitively feeling like how you can best meet other people's needs, which can be a blessing and a challenge. But there's just an awareness of the depth of life and, an excitement and a creativity. And I think that's important to focus on. With, of course, the caveat that it's not, people get very triggered by saying ADHD is a superpower. I think it's important to highlight the benefits of it, but not totally wash out the fact that there are a lot of challenges. So it's sort of that delicate walk. So it doesn't have to hold you back, I guess, is my takeaway I would share. You can learn skills like taking care of your home. Absolutely. You can learn skills like time management, being on time, productivity, all the things. but please don't think you're broken in any way, or the people around you are that have it. There's challenges to work through, but there's beautiful gifts too. And the more we focus on that, the more I think we can work with how we're inherently wired, how we were made, how we were meant to be in this world, rather than pushing against it.
That's great. And I'm going to find those episodes and link them in the show notes to those podcasts that you talked about. I also want to link to Penn, I think his name is Penn, last name Holderness, the Holderness family. He has a book coming out called ADHD is Awesome. It looks amazing. Yes. And he talks about all these things. Like you said, it doesn't negate the difficulties of ADHD, but at the same time, when we focus on the parts of ADHD that lend themselves to being more empathetic, more creative, all of these things, right? Not to say that someone without ADHD can't be those things, but ADHD really lends itself to those things. Then you can start working with it, like you said, instead of working against it. Say, how do I approach this knowing I have ADHD, instead of just trying to muscle your way through it as if you don't have ADHD. Like, that's just not going to work. So I'll make sure that everyone has those resources in the comments or in the show notes. So thank you so much. Alrighty, so let's dive into these last two questions. What is one area of your life, physical or otherwise, that you are paring down right now or you want to pare down?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. Well, we are hoping to move within the next year, which I've shared with you. So I am treating everything in my home as like a mock move. Like, would I bring this with me to the new house? So in light of that, the biggest by far is our playroom with all the toys. Because as much as I said we've pared down and decluttered, I feel like there's always a lot coming in. And so that right now is my Everest, and it's ongoing. So yeah, I would for sure say the kids' toys, kids' clothes are good, but yeah, kids' toys need another go around.
And you're about to have that third one come in.
That's right. So that's where I'm like, do you need all this stuff? I don't think you do. We got to let some go.
Oh man, it never stops. Okay. And what is something that you are looking forward to in your life right now?
I love that question. Gosh, well, the biggest thing is this baby, this sweet little baby. We're really pumped about that, having 3 kids. And my hope is that we find a home that really fits us, where there's a little bit of room to breathe and like, area for our kids to run free outside. That's what I'm probably most excited about. But I'm also just having a lot of fun with this business. I'm loving talking with other women about these topics and helping where I can, and just sort of going where I feel the next best step is with that. So I just, there's a lot I feel thankful for and that I'm excited about right now. And I'm trying to let that fuel me instead of all the like to-dos and all the things, but staying in that sort of inspired, happy, fun space.
So much to look forward to and enjoy that you are setting up for your life intentionally. Just warms my soul. All right. And where can people find you online, find your business, find all the things that you offer?
All the things. Yeah. So I am at Kind Organizing on Instagram, also kindorganizing.com, and then the Kind Organizing podcast.
I will make sure that all of the information is in the show notes. And Elena, thank you a million times over, not only just for sharing these practical tips, but just for the vulnerability it takes to show up and say, hey, I have this experience, and it's not something that has always been talked about in a positive light. And you showed up so generously today. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I love talking with you. And I love where you come from with all of your questions and your intention and how you show up in the world. So thank you. This was so much fun.
You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Lako. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face, so thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at Paring Down Podcast, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.